A great movie doesn't need to be densely packed with incredible secret details, but it's almost never made a movie worse, right? It's always great fun to revisit a film and stumble across secrets you'd never noticed before, from deftly hidden Easter eggs to low-key character and plot developments. You'll never be able to watch these scenes the same way again, but thankfully, in each case, it's most certainly for the better, and will give you something fun to point out to your friends during your next group viewing. This is What Culture, and here are film secrets that were hiding in plain sight. It's set in 1962, The Incredibles. No matter how many times you've seen The Incredibles, have you ever stopped to think about its time period? Pixar's classic superhero animation adopts a retro-futuristic aesthetic, which makes its precise year tricky to pin down, featuring a mix of technology both decades old and brand new in its then release year of 2004. While most likely assume that the film took place in that year, and I mean, what a year, right? Its true setting is actually revealed early on, when we see Mr. Incredible reading a newspaper at home after a long day at the office. Look closely and the date can be made out, May 16th, 1962. Director Brad Bird has since stated that he modeled the film's visual style off what people in the 1960s thought the future would look like, hence the collision of period and contemporary tech. Furthermore, given that the movie's prologue, where supers are outlawed, takes place 15 years prior to the rest of the story, we can deduce that the film kicks off all the way back in 1947, back during the golden age of comics. Neat.
The squad's criminal records, Guardians of the Galaxy. After being jailed at the end of the first act, each member of the Guardians of the Galaxy is put in a matching yellow jumpsuit, with the only differences being the pattern and colour of the lines on the left leg. Fans quickly put together that these must be a reflection of their criminal records, an idea which director James Gunn later expanded upon. Apparently, the colours stand in for different crimes, including murder, arson, burglary, and grievous bodily harm. Gamora's are almost exclusively the same colour, reflecting her long list of murders and assassinations as the daughter of Thanos, while Rocket's cover pretty much everything previously mentioned, as well as breaking out of prison and public drunkenness. We've all been there, little guy. Not only is it a nice little detail, but also expands upon both the characters' history and personalities, acting as a great reflection of the criminal past they eventually leave behind. Well, mostly leave behind.
The clock tower is being unloaded in the background, Back to the Future Part 3. No matter how many times you've seen the Back to the Future movies, this is a pretty easy one to miss. In the third film, when Marty and Doc are talking to the train driver about the train's maximum speed, pay attention to what's going on behind them. That's right, you can see a giant clock being unloaded from the train, which is obviously the very same clock that adorns the top of Hill Valley's clock tower in the future. The clock tower is of course one of the town's major monuments and plays a significant part in the series' events, with Doc climbing the tower in the first movie to install a lightning rod, which eventually allows the DeLorean to travel through time. Seeing its origin here is an extremely cute touch, even if the overwhelming majority of viewers totally missed it.
The couple from the beginning are still together at the end. Die Hard. Early on in John McTiernan's Die Hard, you'll surely remember the seemingly drunk, loved-up couple who accidentally stumble into Holly's office while John McClane is getting changed. They promptly duck out, and once Hans Gruber and the boys siege the Nakatomi Plaza, we see them being accosted in another office, all while they're in the middle of rocking around the Christmas tree. That seems to be the end of the matter, but if you look closely during the film's final moments, once Gruber and his men have been defeated, the pair can once again be seen in the crowd outside the plaza. What would Christmas be without a bit of romance?
Bellwether's true motivations, Zootopia. Though pretty much every Disney movie features a twist in regards to its main villain, one of the most surprising in recent memory came in Zootopia. Uncovering a plot about corrupt officials attempting to frame predators for allegedly turning feral, it turns out that a seemingly innocent sheep, Assistant Mayor Bellwether, is actually responsible for the whole thing. She's a wolf in sheep's clothing, if you will. Yeah, don't worry, I'll be here all week. While it seemingly comes out of nowhere, one small sticky note on her desk at the beginning of the movie actually revealed her relationship to the conspiracy plot straight away. In between everything is the scribbled down number of Doug, a name which means nothing to the viewer initially. However, it's later revealed that he's the one responsible for shooting animals and making them feral, of course, on Bellwether's orders.
Loki's sceptre causes the Avengers to argue the Avengers. One of the Avengers' most memorable scenes is the sequence where the heroes start arguing amongst themselves in Bruce Banner's lab. But what isn't made immediately obvious is that this squabbling is in fact caused by the presence of Loki's sceptre, which houses the Mind Stone. Granted, it wasn't known at the time of the film's release that the sceptre contained the Mind Stone, and it possibly wasn't even conceived yet, but re-watching the scene today, it's a plot point quite literally hiding in plain sight. For starters, Joss Whedon briefly focuses on the sceptre when the argument breaks out, and the camera even flips upside down to indicate that something untoward is happening, along with a high-pitched sound being emitted. This sound rings out again later in the scene as Tony Stark appears to have a headache, suggesting the sceptre is affecting the heroes' minds. Elsewhere, you've got that distinctly off-kilter Dutch angle shot of Thor that feels totally at odds with the rest of the scene, and also Banner instinctively grabbing the sceptre at the end of the confrontation. It's easy to take the scene on its own terms, especially if you haven't watched the movie in quite some time, but all the evidence is quite blatantly laid out for viewers. Little did we know that this stone would also later become Vision.
The Supreme Beings are hovering above a tiny convenience store. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Here's an especially mind-melding secret because it only became noticeable once the movie was released on 4K, more than 30 years after its original theatrical release. In Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, the titular duo, Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves, eventually travel to the far future, where they discover a utopian society that worships them and their music. In the scene, we meet three supreme beings who are shown levitating on top of a large bench-like object. In previous releases of the movie, it simply wasn't possible to get a clear look at the object, but per the higher resolution 4K release, it's revealed to be a miniature version of the Circle K convenience store where Rufus, George Carlin, first locates the duo and sets their glorious future in motion. Evidently, the Circle K has itself become a totem of worship for the future society, a fact which surprised both Alex Winter and the film's writer, Ed Solomon, neither of whom had any memory of this prop appearing on set.
Tesla vs. Edison, The Prestige. While The Prestige, like each one of Christopher Nolan's movies, has its fair share of details which become more meaningful when you know the full story, it's an entirely missable subplot between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison that's the most interesting. The film never actually shows Edison on screen, opting to focus on David Bowie's Tesla, but it does show how he's just as committed to ruining his rival's inventions as the two magicians are to ruining each other's magic show. Illusions. Ruining each other's illusions. When Tesla shows off his latest machine on stage, he's heckled in a blink and you'll miss it shot by a bearded man in the audience, apparently there to highlight how risky the inventor's new creation is. However, in another shot towards the end, the same man is present at a hotel, and the receptionist refers to him as one of Thomas Edison's men. Not only does this add an extra meaning to the prior sequence, but it hints even more strongly to the rivalry between the two inventors going on behind the scenes.
Marla's bus driver has a black eye and is a Fight Club member. Fight Club. In Fight Club's third act, the narrator puts Marla Singer on a bus for her own safety, and for maybe a second, we get a brief look at the bus driver. His face isn't terribly well lit in the scene, but keen-eyed viewers might have noticed that he's sporting a black eye, subtly implying that he himself is a member of Fight Club, and explaining how Marla ends up kidnapped by Tyler Durden for the film's explosive climax. Slightly more obvious is the fact that as the bus drives away, several of the passengers can be seen standing up and approaching Marla. But again, the scene's low lighting makes it incredibly easy to miss this fact, or simply dismiss it as passengers getting up to disembark the bus.
Norrington cleans the Black Pearl with his old wig. Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. James Norrington was introduced in the original Pirates of the Caribbean as a major foil for the roguish heroes, the wig-wearing Commodore attempting to capture Jack Sparrow while quote-unquote rescuing the object of his affections, Elizabeth Swann. By the time the first sequel, Dead Man's Chest, rolls around, a disgraced Norrington has resigned from the British Navy and disappeared to parts unknown, until he's discovered boozing it up in the dirty remnants of his uniform in Tortuga. A desperate Norrington eventually joins the crew of Sparrow's ship, the Black Pearl, where we briefly see him scrubbing away at the ship's deck. But look again, Norrington isn't merely using any old rag to clean the ship. He's using his old Commodore's wig, which is naturally now a ratty, sodden mess. If nothing else, it's a slightly amusing indication of just how far Norrington has fallen, using a symbol of his former status to scrub the scum off his enemy's ship.
Luke's projection didn't leave footprints, The Last Jedi. With the full might of the First Order facing down on him, everything was set for the confrontation between Luke and Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi to be the highlight of the movie. Everything was in place except for one tiny little detail: Luke wasn't actually there. While it's obvious in hindsight, I mean, how did Luke have the time to get a fresh trim, dye his beard, and grab his own lightsaber while the fate of the entire galaxy was hanging in the balance? There is one key detail which makes this even clearer. The surface of the planet they're on is initially white salt, which turns into a dark red when anyone touches it. Consequently, the pristine surface is completely different colors by the time Luke turns up to the battle. However, he doesn't seem to be able to impact it. Multiple times we see him walking on the salt without leaving any footprints, while Kylo and everyone else does. Obviously, to a lot of fans' chagrin, it's because he's not there.
Bond learns a poker trick from earlier in the movie, Casino Royale. Casino Royale features many moments demonstrating 007's sly intelligence, such as the outstanding parkour sequence where he uses his cunning to outmaneuver a much faster opponent, and the iconic poker game in Montenegro, which sees him utilising a neat trick he had inflicted upon himself earlier on. In the first act, Bond is playing poker in the Bahamas when his mark Alex Dimitrios uses his beautiful wife Solange to distract his fellow players. That doesn't stop Bond winning Dimitrios' Aston Martin DB5 though. 007 clearly took note of this trick, however, as in the high-stakes poker game in the Casino Royale later, he has Vesper Lynd make an attention-grabbing entrance in a stunning purple dress, leaving the other poker players totally stunned and slack-jawed. It's a small moment, but one that nevertheless gives Bond a temporary psychological edge in the game. And given the movie is all about 007 learning on the job and amassing his signature calculating intelligence, it was a brilliantly subtle way to imply that.
Eddie's clown training lets him kill the weasels. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Near the end of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, hero Eddie Valiant, played by the brilliant Bob Hoskins, performs a goofy vaudeville-esque slapstick routine, injuring himself in comically over-the-top fashion in order to make the Toon Patrol, a gang of cartoony weasels, laugh themselves to death. Yet Eddie's pratfalls didn't just come out of nowhere. They were surreptitiously set up earlier in the film when we catch a brief glimpse of a photo on his desk showing both himself and his brother as children on the road with their father, who was a clown for the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. Given that the picture even shows young Eddie himself dressed up as a clown, it's reasonable to deduce that this is where he honed his unexpected penchant for physical comedy, as ultimately served him so well decades later.
Woody Harrelson's character tampers with his grenade before it kills him, the Thin Red Line. Woody Harrelson has a small but memorable role in Terrence Malick's war epic as Sergeant Keck, who memorably dies during an enemy engagement after reaching for his grenade and accidentally pulling out the pin. Before he has time to react, he's mortally wounded by the exploding grenade. And though it's not immediately apparent to viewers, Keck essentially ended up getting himself killed. Earlier in the film, Keck is seen using a knife to bend the pin on the grenade, a classic army tactic intended to make pulling the pin faster in the heat of battle, but one that obviously comes at the expense of safety. To most, it simply seems like Keck got a bum rap with a defective grenade, but if you're really paying attention to him earlier, he compromised the explosive device all by himself.
The melting Marshmallow Man does the Terminator 2 thumbs up. Ghostbusters Afterlife. You probably remember the scene in Ghostbusters Afterlife where ghosts are let loose in a Walmart and we witness tiny versions of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man coming to life before cheerily melting themselves and being turned into s'mores. But pay close attention where one of the delicious little fellas is melting on top of a barbecue grill. As he turns to sugary goop and disappears through the grill, he makes a very distinctive hand gesture. Yes, the little Marshmallow Man raises up his thumb in what's clearly a reference to the ending of Terminator 2 Judgment Day, where Arnie's T-800 does the very same thing while being lowered into the molten steel and destroyed.
The T-Rex isn't chasing Claire, Jurassic World. Despite Jurassic World being a very, very dumb movie, the one small leap in logic that took the most flack post-release came from Claire managing to outrun a T-Rex whilst wearing heels. That initially does seem a bit dumb, but there's one detail everyone overlooked which explains everything. Early in the movie, it's established that flares are used to train the T-Rex and other dinos to eat on command, with the camp operators throwing them at other animals to devour. There's an association so that the creatures will follow the flare with the expectation that food will be waiting for them on the other end. Consequently then, when Claire cracks open a flare at the very end and starts to run away from the T-Rex, the reason she isn't instantly eaten is because the dinosaur isn't actually chasing her, but rather following her. It's been conditioned to understand that flare equals food, so it isn't necessarily trying to get her, but rather find something it can chow down on.
A medieval version of the London Eye appears in one shot, A Knight's Tale. A Knight's Tale is a ludicrously entertaining medieval adventure romp that, with its soundtrack of contemporary pop music and plentiful anachronistic dialogue, hasn't even the faintest pretense of period accuracy. Keep your eyes peeled deep into the movie's third act, however, and you might stumble across one especially hilarious hidden gag: the presence of a medieval version of the London Eye, some 600 plus years before it was actually built and roughly 500 years before the first Ferris wheel was even invented. It gets even better though. You probably assumed the London Eye was simply a CGI addition in post-production, right? Nope. The $65 million movie spent a ludicrous $500,000 of its budget constructing an actual scale model of the damn thing. There's no way that expense would be justifiable to any producer with basic business sense, but you have to admire their tangible commitment to the joke. I'd say it was worth it, even if it is just for this.
Miles Bron's Upside Down Rothko, Glass Onion, and Knives Out Mystery. There's one very early indication in Glass Onion that the film's ultimate antagonist, the Elon Musk-esque tech bro Miles Bron, played by Edward Norton, isn't so much a criminal mastermind as he is a superficial dumbass simply posing as one. Look around his lush surroundings and you can spot Mark Rothko's 1961 painting number 207 hanging up, an immediately recognizable color-field painting comprised of red and dark blue blocks. But more crucially, as will only be apparent to art aficionados, and I'm not one, Bron has actually hung the painting upside down, with the block of red color incorrectly appearing at the bottom rather than at the top. Even if this isn't a smoking gun which pegs Bron as the killer, it does nevertheless indicate that he is only at most a passing, pretentious interest in fine art rather than a genuine knowledge or enthusiasm for it.
The Unbreakable connection? Split. M. Night Shyamalan's Split blew everyone's freaking minds back in 2016 when the end credits revealed that it was actually a stealth sequel to the cult classic Unbreakable the whole time. There's not many connections between the two to be found in the movie itself, aside from old Misery Guts Bruce Willis showing up at the end anyway, but there was one gigantic clue featured in Split's poster that teased a relationship to Unbreakable months before it even came out. At first, the cracks in the poster just looked to be reflecting the split personalities referenced in the title, yeah, nothing to see here. But if you line it up side by side with Unbreakable's poster, you'll realise they actually continue the same design. Likewise, they're both cracks in glass, itself a reference to Mr. Glass as supervillain in this universe. Man, this is so good it almost makes me forgive him for The Last Airbender.
Shot of the VFX team making the movie. Everything Everywhere All at Once. Due to post-production on Everything Everywhere All at Once being completed during one of the worst phases of the pandemic, the VFX team worked together remotely, using Zoom to collaborate on shots. And hilariously enough, directors The Daniels even included a screen grab from one of the teams in the final film itself. During the multiversal montage of all the different versions of protagonist Evelyn, played by Michelle Yeoh, we catch blink and you'll miss it flashes of seemingly hundreds of Evelyns, and sneaked among them is a single frame shot of Michelle Yeoh stood against a green screen while the movie's VFX artist can be seen discussing the shot on the Zoom interface.
The bride's name, Kill Bill. For much of the first Kill Bill, the audience is purposefully left out of the narrative. While the basics are established, the full extent of the story is kept under wraps, to the point where even the name of Uma Thurman's character is obscured. Dubbed either the bride or Kiddo, there's even a scene where her full name is bleeped out, in order to keep her real identity a secret even to the people watching. However, despite going to great lengths to obscure it, her name actually does feature in the movie, albeit written down in a brief close-up. It's stamped on the bride's boarding pass, revealing her name as Beatrix Kiddo. Director Quentin Tarantino actually extends this mystery into the second films, but for those scouring the fine details of that first flick, they'd already figured it out.
The first shot spoils the movie's twist, Us. Much like his debut Get Out, Jordan Peele's Us is absolutely a movie that rewards viewers who pay attention, be it in the form of Easter eggs or visual gags which expand the movie's universe. And hilariously, observant viewers might notice that the spine of the film's plot is effectively spoiled in its very first shot, which focuses on a TV playing an ad for Hands Across America with a VHS case of the 1984 cult classic horror film CHUD visible on the left-hand side. In its namesake, CHUD stands for Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers, and though Us's villainous Tethered aren't ultimately revealed to be cannibals, they are underground dwellers who, much like in that other film, emerge above ground to terrorize well-to-do humans. The nod goes deeper than that though, as Peele revealed in an interview that his first childhood girlfriend was none other than the daughter of Douglas Cheek, the director of CHUD. Incredible! Though the VHS is easily missed or even dismissed as merely a playful reference to a trashy classic, knowing how densely symbolic Get Out's visuals were, eagle-eyed audiences may well have put two and two together right from the jump.
Meek's whiteboard spoils the entire film. Thor: Love and Thunder. Remember when Midsommar kicked off by showing a mural that not so cryptically revealed the plot of the entire movie? Well, Taika Waititi apparently thought that was a brilliant idea because he just did the same thing in Thor: Love and Thunder. Early on, we see a very dapper Meek standing by a whiteboard in New Asgard, and if you hit the pause button, the board is actually full of illustrations which basically show off the movie's entire narrative trajectory. The drawings clearly show Gore getting Stormbreaker, Thor encountering Zeus, a fleet of children being imbued with Thor's powers, the appearance of Eternity, and even Jane Foster's demise. This shot comes and goes quickly enough that anybody watching the movie on the big screen had no time at all to make sense of it, but on streaming, absolutely. The shot was also included in Love and Thunder's trailers, though was given a sneaky edit to ensure that enterprising fans didn't deduce the whole story months in advance, instead serving as a summary of the trailer itself. That is seriously sneaky.
The guards not giving a damn. Shutter Island. Shutter Island's final twist reveals that the whole narrative is a form of therapy concocted to snap psychiatric patient Teddy out of the delusions he's convinced himself are real, with pretty much everything in the film being constructed purely for him. This is obvious if you observe the entire cast though, as the employees of the island constantly mess up the roles they're given. Teddy's alleged detective partner, actually a doctor on the island, struggles to even get out his badge when he first arrives because it's attached to his gun holster, something which he's not used to wearing. However, the most obvious indication that everything is a show comes when the guards are searching for an allegedly missing patient. Though some are indeed pretending to search for her, a few shots make it clear that other guards are just relaxing. They're surprisingly laid back considering there's a missing person at hand, but that's because they know there really isn't.
A man is laying next to Joy while she accuses Craig of cheating. Friday. Cult classic comedy Friday has more layers than you ever imagined, given that so many of its fans have missed this hilariously sneaky gag no matter how many times they've seen it. When Craig's girlfriend Joy memorably calls him up and accuses him of cheating, look to the side of her and you'll see that she's actually got a man sleeping in her bed. As if Joy's not shown to be crazy enough, she's off accusing Craig of being unfaithful while doing the very same thing herself. As a mere screenshot, this is obviously too damn obvious to miss, and yet take a peek online and you'll find that loads of fans are only recently discovering it for the first time.
Thor not being the firstborn. Avengers: Age of Ultron. Thor's nightmare in Avengers: Age of Ultron turned out to be a pretty iffy scene in the grand scheme of things, as while the prophecy of the end of Asgard did come into play, Thor Ragnarok's apocalyptic narrative didn't really reflect this scene. That said, it's still an important part of the franchise for one reason. It actually revealed that Thor wasn't Odin's first child. While interacting with a crazed Heimdall, Thor is referred to as the first son of Odin, rather than his firstborn or first child. While that could just be strange phrasing, it could also be a reference to the fact that while Thor was indeed Odin's first son, the goddess of death Hela was eventually revealed to have been born before him.
John Wick's new dog was scheduled to be put down. John Wick. The first John Wick ends with the titular assassin breaking into an animal clinic and freeing a pit bull, taking it as his own pet and eventually naming it Good Dog in the sequel. But if you're not paying incredibly close attention, it's easy to miss the precise nature of what John is up to here, and many assumed on initial viewing that John might have just nicked somebody's beloved dog. It's only clearly visible on screen for maybe half a second, but Good Dog's case notes have a "to be put down" stamp on the front.